Today, I've got some big news. Well, it's big to me. You may not care at all. Let's go. This is Larry with Southern Exposure, information and inspiration for the amateur photographer, where I share lessons, tips, and personal stories of my photography journey. If that sounds interesting, please subscribe to my channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Okay, I've mentioned some of my gear in the past, and it's all been pretty basic entry-level stuff, but that's all about to change. That's right, Nikon Z6 with the 24-70 f4 and the FTZ adapter. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I'm going to share with you why I made such a huge jump from an entry-level crop sensor DSLR to full-frame mirrorless, and why I chose the Z6 over the Z7. This is a huge jump for me. Not only am I switching from an APS-C crop sensor entry-level camera to a full-frame camera, but from DSLR to mirrorless all at the same time. I drove my wife crazy watching YouTube videos about camera reviews and specs, and here's why I did it. I felt like I was ready to move up. I was bumping up against the limitations of my D5500 more and more often, specifically when it comes to low light performance and video, and the Z6 made perfect sense. The full frame sensor and the fact that it's 24 megapixels versus 45 on the Z7 means that it performs incredibly well at high ISO levels. Remember, fewer pixels means bigger pixels, and bigger pixels means better light gathering performance. In addition, the general opinion seemed to be that this was the first truly capable video camera that Nikon had ever produced, and given my limited experience, I'd have to agree. I have to admit, at first I wasn't really interested in mirrorless at all. I scoffed at the idea of an electronic viewfinder. I was one of those guys who felt like a proper camera should have a mirror. Then I remembered another time that I ignored the winds of change and got left behind. Back in the early 2000s, I was newly married and spent what was to me at the time a lot of money on a good camera for me and Betsy to document our lives together. Digital photography was pretty new back then, and I thought DSLRs were just a fad, so I bought a 35mm film camera. Of course, not long after that, DSLRs really took off. Digital point-and-shoots dominated the rest of the market, and before you knew it, it was a challenge just to find a place to buy film for this dinosaur. I was not about to make the same mistake twice, and the more I looked at mirrorless, the more value I saw. Now there's a ton of reviews of the Z6 online, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but here is what I love about this camera. The low light performance is spectacular, as promised. Here are two shots taken at the same time, same light, same settings at ISO 6400. This is from a crop sensor DSLR, the Nikon D5500, and this is from the Z6. Both of these are straight out of camera, and you can really see the difference, especially in the shadow areas. As far as the video capabilities, I'm definitely a beginner at video, but this thing blows away my D5500 due to a much improved autofocus system and the 5-axis in-body image stabilization of the Z6. Not to mention 4K at 30 frames per second and 1080p video recording at up to 120 frames per second for that buttery slow motion. Add in the fact that the Z6 is weather sealed, autofocus points cover nearly the entire field of view, and I could get the adapter, which allows me to use the only expensive piece of glass I own so far, and this was an easy decision to make. So once I was ready to go full frame mirrorless, how did I choose the Z6 over the Z7? It's simple, really. I used the exact same criteria: low light performance and video capability. I don't plan on printing out wall-sized murals, so I don't really need the 45 megapixels of the Z7. And the trade-off for those 45 megapixels comes in video, where you can only shoot 4K using line skipping, and in that case you're really not getting the benefit of that big, beautiful full-frame sensor. Not to mention the fact that the Z7 costs about $1,400 more. This camera is still very new to me. There's a lot of features that I haven't tried yet, and probably some that I'm not even aware of yet. I'm working my way through the manual and watching a lot of YouTube videos on this particular model to learn as much as I can. But here are a few things I'm just getting started on that I'm really excited about. One of the things I always struggled with shooting video and still frames on the same camera was having to change the settings back and forth between the two. I'd have my shutter speed, aperture, ISO, focusing mode all set up to shoot video, then I'd have to change all of that to snap off a few quick still shots, and then change it all back to go back to shooting video again. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but after a while it gets a little tedious, and I actually missed some shots because when I changed back from one to the other, I might have forgotten to adjust one of those settings. Rookie mistake, I know, but hey, it happens. That's where the mode switch comes in. You can switch between photo and video, and whenever you switch into a particular mode, it loads up all of the settings that you had the last time you used that mode. For instance, if I'm shooting stills outdoors at f8, 1/125th of a second, ISO 200, and using single autofocus, I can switch from the photo mode to video mode, and it will automatically change all of those settings to whatever I used the last time I shot video. Like, say for instance, 1/60th of a second shutter speed for 30 frame per second video, f4 aperture, and ISO 100. It also will change my focus mode from AF single to AF full, which is what I usually use for video. Personally, I think this is an awesome feature for amateurs and pros alike. Along those same lines, the mode dial on the top of the camera includes 3 user presets that you can adjust to. Now, these can be used to set up the camera in advance for specific shooting situations. I haven't programmed mine yet, but I'm thinking about setting one up for outdoor landscapes, one for indoor portraits using off-camera flash, and maybe the third for my basic video settings. The Z6 can also be programmed to shoot a series of still images known as a time-lapse. Now, you can have the camera assemble these images into a movie file in camera, or you can just have it store the individual image files, which you can download, process, and assemble into a video on your software in the computer. Now, there is one thing that I don't like about the Z6, but I knew about it when I bought the camera and decided to pull the trigger anyway. While the LCD screen does tilt up and down, it doesn't flip around to the front side of the camera. I'm okay with this shortcoming for 2 reasons. First, the more I use this camera for video, the more I trust the autofocus system. So I don't necessarily have to see myself to know whether or not I'm in focus. Second, they have greatly improved the SnapBridge app. Now, I downloaded this thing about a year or 2 ago, and it was unusable. It was horrible. But there must have been some major changes behind the scenes, because now the SnapBridge app works almost flawlessly. And if I really need to be able to see myself in the shot for composition or framing, I can simply use my cell phone as a remote monitor for the camera. Not quite as simple as flipping around a screen to look at, but pretty close, and it works for me. And since this is the only thing I've found so far that I don't like about the Nikon Z6, I feel like I made the right choice. Obviously, this camera has a lot more features than I was able to get into in this video, and probably some drawbacks too that might be dependent on your specific needs. The one I hear the most about is the single card slot. Now, since I don't shoot weddings or events, it's not really a big deal to me, but it might be to you. That's the great thing about being into photography right now. There are so many great cameras out on the market that whatever your needs are, if you focus on what it is that you want to achieve, you can find the right camera for you out there. Subscribe to my channel and ring that notification bell so we can learn about this camera together. Let's find out what this thing can do. Jump into the comments down below and let me know what you think about DSLR versus mirrorless. Is the DSLR dead? Is mirrorless the future? Or will they both be eclipsed by AI-powered smartphone cameras? Thanks for watching Southern Exposure, information and inspiration for the amateur photographer.